We talked about a lot of the challenges, managing cold climate vineyards. A lot of them are pretty obvious. Are there some advantages to having grapes grown in a cold climate? Other than the fact that your workers aren't working out in 100 plus Fahrenheit weather, doing their canopy management. What are some of the top benefits? And you can mention some other challenges if we haven't covered any, by all means. But sometimes the season's shorter, right? For some of these
Yep.
varieties. So you can say, well, we crunched our whole season into, you know, a third of or half of what it would take in a warm climate in California. So that means we did half as many sprays, or it's just, but everything happens very quick. So you
Yeah.
got to be up there with your canopy management even quicker. And so, what are some of the possible benefits? You can go any direction with this. I just gave a
Well,
quick.
the cold, I'll be honest, we don't manage the canopies tremendously different than many other areas. Um, yes, we don't deal with the intense heat, so we don't run into there's not as much concern, let's say, over sunburn or things like that in many cases that you might have in a hotter area. But, we do have to think, we're always thinking winter survival. I mean, it's Nelson Shawless talked about it years ago. He said, you got to think about not just the current year, but the next year's crop at the same time. So you're always planning to keep, and ultimately the biggest part that I got from was having a balanced crop. Because we have the risk of damage through the winter, we can't push the vines over the top or else we're going to likely run into winter damage because they just don't store as many carbohydrates. They're just not as properly matured going into the fall or into the winter, all of these things. So we have to look at, let's balance the crop, make sure it's really well balanced so that we're getting carbohydrate accumulation into the plant at the same time we're ripening the fruit to the level we do. Cold climates, the dilemma they have, we have no post-harvest ripening or post-harvest carbohydrate accumulation. In many cases, the leaves have already been frosted.
So how about just wine styles and varieties? I mean, what do you see really? This is not really a wine podcast per se, but I love just exploring what makes cold climate wines unique in their wine style. Is there a wine character or something that you'd like to point out
I
that
would I would probably say that in a colder climate, you're not looking at aging wines for a long period of time because of the ripening phase of the vine and its balance and its makeup of tannins and everything else. So generally, those wines in colder climates you'll find would be fresh, upfront, um, kind of bold, and generally not extremely old.
Mhm.
Some people will age and try it on some of the more classic vinifera reds,
Sure.
but I'm finding more and more people uh, like the fresh stuff.
Mhm.
Um, you finding even with some of the stuff more stainless ferments uh, coming out rather than or using a mild amount of oak or anything to try, and they're looking at blends to make the complexity of the wine rather than looking at single varietals.
Love it.
Um,
Love it. Yeah. No, I recently was interviewing growers from Arizona and saying how, almost all of my favorite wines are blends of 4 or 5 different grape varieties that they're doing. And so, and like you mentioned, um, the white wine from Nova Scotia,
Tidal Bay.
Idle Bay, a blend of various, and you still have unique expression within your palette of colors with those 12 varieties, and how you make the wine and what proportions of each grape you use. So it's still a lot of play and a lot of interpretation and artistry there. But I like how it's all geared towards a common goal. So
Oh, it's I consider the blends are what I call the variation on what was maybe a single varietal, but was the famous mass planting. In other words, a block that was polyclonal, all kinds of different clones within one block, and then they would harvest it and produce the wine. And it always, I'll be very honest, it always tastes better than a single clone varietal in a bottle. I bar none. I like the diversity and the taste. That's me. But a lot of people say the same thing. And some of the classic wines that we see on the shelves are truly from mass plantings and polyclonals. if they're vinifera. And so the same thing even with the hybrids. Looking at the blending of different hybrids kind of introduces that complexity to it that you're not going to get by just having all of this one item.
So it kind of seems like you're leaning towards what I have seen lots of growers do, and I've done myself with growers of my own who've been in this predicament, is trying to grow what's there while simultaneously renewing from the bottom, but trying to get
Yep.
some form of a crop. And then that really allows you to fully assess, do you need that spare part? Do you need that spare part from below or not? And so basically you're kind of developing a new trunk while, or two or three, while you're
Yep.
in the current cane system or cordon system in production. And I've also had growers who have produced new trunks and then spent the second year of developing fruitful positions or spurs if they're doing spur pruning, while still keeping that old cordon. And maybe by year three, cutting that old wood out. By then, it's pretty much shown its damage. And then you have enough buds in place that you're not sending the vine into this vegetative imbalance. You're coming back in with the same number of buds that you left off with. So the root system, like you mentioned, is stabilized in a sense. Is that kind
Yep.
of common strategy? Is it one that you promote? Is it just really a case by case? Because I'll tell you what, I have ideas about what I think I'm going to do in these situations, and then when we see how the vines grow, we pivot, we shift gears, and we change based on that.
Oh, exactly. You have to you have to respond to what the plant's telling you it's going to do. An interesting thing is that let's say we had something pretty severe, and most of our cordon material isn't giving me much of anything, but I've got suckers from the base. I don't mind leaving old trunks in place for 2 years as training. In fact, we'll tie suckers to them. Because the biggest dilemma that we have with bringing renewals from the base is that they're, like, hey, you get a high wind at the wrong time and they just have a tendency to snap right off. Their point of lignification and attachment is not really strong.
Right.
Guys talked about driving by with tractors and they'd seem to like look at them the wrong way and they'd fall off.
Yeah.
It's important to have that, but I agree with you. I think it's a sequential process, and you take it what you're looking at with the plant, but recognizing that if you've had a pretty good heart event, really significant bud damage, likely some form of trunk damage, get into the gear of renewal and reestablishment of a trunk right away, and allow it to go. And then when you get the first opportunity, once you've got your infrastructure in place to have more fruiting, in other words, you get a sucker that comes up, and the next year you get a few laterals that can go out in terms of forming for your canes. And then in year three, the second year after, now you have more infrastructure. Yeah, then you can go back and be a little more aggressive to it and get it, because you're right. You're trying to stay with pencil size growth on your suckers. You don't want cigar size that's bullwood.